Today, we're very pleased to have Beth Mitcham, who is our Cooperative Extension Specialist and Center Director for Postharvest Technology. Her research and extension program focuses on post-harvest biology and technology of fruits, including pears, cherries, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, almonds, walnuts, and others. She conducts studies on harvest maturity, storage conditions, and flavor quality, with a focus on regulation of fruit ripening in pears and cellular regulation of calcium deficiency disorders in tomato and apple. Some of you might recall that she gave an excellent talk on blossom end rot in tomatoes in 2017. So that's part of her specialty. In addition, her program is actively developing strategies for post-harvest insect control in harvested and exported commodities. She won the Chancellor's International Engagement Achievement Award from UC Davis in 2017, presumably for your work with some of the Horticulture Innovation Lab, USAID.
Right.
And she also won Outstanding International Horticulturalist from the American Society for Horticultural Science in 2015. So we're really lucky to have Beth here, and thank you for taking the time to come visit us virtually. And take it away. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you. Thank you, Margaret, for that nice introduction. I really appreciate that. And it's a real pleasure of mine to be with all of you today. And as Margaret said, we're going to talk about things you want to consider as you harvest and then handle your vegetables after harvest. First of all, it's important to recognize that vegetables, like other horticultural crops, have certain characteristics. So they have a lot of high water content, a lot of water inside, generally pretty easily damaged, but they're quite diverse. They represent a lot of different types of genetic backgrounds, different genus and species, different types of tissue. The other important thing is that even though we've harvested them from the plant, they're still alive. And our goal is to try to keep them alive and healthy until they're consumed. And unfortunately, once we cut them off the plant, they do start to deteriorate. And so our objective is to try to slow that process down. Okay, so we're going to start off by talking about harvest. So how do you know when is the best time to harvest the product to get a product that has good eating quality, but also is going to get to market successfully? Well, we like to talk about this concept of maturity and maturity indices, and that's essentially a harvest index. When is the best time to harvest to get the best flavor, nutrition, shelf life, but also yield? Of course, that's very important as well. We can look at this, what we call a development continuum. And with all vegetable plants, we're going to start with our seed at the very beginning of development, and then we have a growth phase of the product, and then it gets into this maturation phase where it's getting close to being at the stage where we want to harvest it. And then if it's a fruit vegetable like tomato or cucumber, it'll go through a ripening process unless we harvest it before that, which we sometimes do. And then eventually it comes to a stage called senescence. Basically, that's the old age and then death of the product. And so if we look at tomato, you can see a good example of that here, where we have the flower is pollinated and then the tomato starts to grow. We have a period of rapid expansion, and we get to that full size, what we call maturation, then ripening, and then senescence. So if we look at vegetables along this continuum, we see that different kinds of crops you might work with fall in different places. So sprouts are seedlings, so they're at the initiation phase. And then rapidly growing tissues include things like asparagus and broccoli and our lettuces, also cucumber, bean, and sweet corn. And then in terms of being mature, we might talk about melons and tomatoes, carrots, onions, potatoes, and then of course ripening would be some of our fruit like tomato. So some examples of maturity indices are things like the size of the commodity. So that's important for many of these on this page here. But also for asparagus, we might look at, the structure of the flower bud there. For broccoli, we want to harvest it before the florets start to open. Same with asparagus, you don't want that bud to start to open, but you want it to be a good size, so you have to find that sweet spot. Sometimes for lettuce, we're looking at how developed is that head. And so I'm going to talk at the end of my talk about an app we have that talks about all of these maturity indices as well as other recommended practices, and you can look that up for the different vegetables you're interested in. Okay, so now we've harvested our product, and what are the things that are going to affect the rate of deterioration and eventual potential loss of that product before it gets to market? This is going to include things like respiration, and that's like the metabolic rate of the product. Ethylene, which is a gas that many products produce that can speed deterioration and death. Any kind of damage or water loss, fungal or bacterial diseases. There's vegetables can get various disorders like tip burn that can cause issues. And some things will continue to grow, and that can cause some challenges after harvest. But the biggest one is time and temperature. And I think for your operations, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about temperature, why it's important. And what we really want to do is minimize the time at the highest temperatures. And that's going to be generally the field temperatures. So you want to try to minimize how long the product is exposed to those high temperatures. So temperature is important because it's very much related to the respiration rate. So the higher the temperature, the faster the respiration rate or the metabolism of the product. And during respiration, we take all those great sugars in our product that make it taste nice, and we burn those sugars with oxygen to give energy to the plant for survival. And that's a process, it's a natural process that has to happen, but the higher the temperature, the faster that process goes. And respiration rate is also related directly to the rate of perishability or the rate of degradation after harvest. So the higher the respiration rate, the higher the rate of perishability. And so you can see that some of the most perishable crops asparagus, peas, and sweet corn, artichoke and broccoli, and then tomatoes a little bit in the moderate category. And then some of the drier products like, or more hardy products would be things like potato and garlic, and then our dried products like nuts. So this example with broccoli gives you a little bit of a feel for how temperature affects shelf life. So at the very bottom, we have our temperatures in Fahrenheit, and then on the y-axis, we have the number of days until the broccoli starts to show yellowing. And most consumers don't want their broccoli to be turning yellow. So what you find is that at the lower temperatures, and 32 degrees is the recommended best temperature for broccoli. At that temperature, we have a lot of time. We have over a month. But if the temperature is at 68 degrees, we only have like 2 days. So it makes a big difference, and it's a little bit of an exponential curve here. So one of the things we can do to try to manage temperature is to keep the product from getting hot in the first place. So on the plant, the product naturally cools a bit because of a process called transpiration, where water moves from the roots through the plant and then evaporates from the surface. And that process actually cools the plant tissue. Once you harvest it, that transpiration slows down considerably. And so you don't get the cooling that you had before. So things that are dark in color, especially when exposed to the sun, will heat up a lot after harvest. So couple things you can do, you can harvest earlier in the day when that's possible, because it's generally much cooler, especially during our summer periods here. You can keep the product shaded. That's a really important tool that can make a big difference. A shaded product that's protected from the sun can actually stay cooler than the ambient air temperatures. But if you have it in the sun, it will heat up well beyond the air temperature. And then, of course, you want to try to move the product from the field to hopefully some kind of cool facility in a shorter period of time as possible. Yeah, so here's an example with these blueberries. The ambient temperature was 22 Celsius, which is about in the low 70s, and the fruit itself had gotten up to 35 to 37, so that's like 85 degrees, so quite a bit warmer. Now, it is important to mention when we're talking about temperature and then potentially using cold storage to keep product in good condition after harvest, we do need to mention that there is this phenomenon called chilling injury that can occur. And some products should not be stored at 32 degrees or even 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but should be stored at temperatures more like 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Getting my Celsius and Fahrenheit mixed up here. Yeah, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's because these products are generally from tropical areas where they originated. And so they're not able to tolerate those really low temperatures without some damage. So it's important to keep that in mind and to recognize that every product has a recommended temperature. And again, that app that I mentioned will have all that information in there that you can have ready access to. It's also available on our website. But it is a time temperature sort of phenomenon. So short-term exposure to low temperatures won't cause a problem. It's when you get into, a week or more generally where you start to have a problem. Okay, so the other thing, in addition to temperature, the other thing to really pay attention to in terms of wanting to maintain the quality of your product, whether it's the appearance quality, the amount of time you have to get it to market in good condition, even the nutritional quality, I would say, you want to reduce physical damage. And there's different kinds of physical damage that can occur. There's impact damage where you drop the product or something hard hits it and impacts it. There's compression damage, which can often happen if you fill up a crate with your product and you have product a couple inches over the top, and then you take another crate and you put it on top, and then everything gets compressed down. That can cause damage. Abrasion, punctures, any kind of breakage of the tissue, and then bruising is also an issue. The skin of the plants, whether it's fruit or leaves, the epidermis is what that outer layer is called. It actually provides a lot of protection, protects from water loss, pathogen invasion. And so we want to keep that intact as well as possible so that the plant can protect itself from various types of deterioration. So this is just a list of what can happen when you have damage, and we've kind of gone over that in some of what I've been saying, but it does increase the rate of water loss and decay. Also increases that respiration rate, which is tied to the rate of deterioration. And of course, it makes the product less appealing and can affect the texture as well. So some of the things we can do to reduce the potential for physical damage. You want to train your harvesters to harvest correctly and carefully so they're not, I guess if you're harvesting lettuce, you don't want to be crushing the head with one hand while you're cutting it from the ground, but you want to, hold the plant in such a way that you're not crushing it. Minimize the amount of handling of the product. So look at your operation and think about if there's steps you could take out, which will reduce the number of people and the number of times somebody is touching the product. Keeping sand and grit out of your bins or anything that you're putting the product into, because that can act like sandpaper to abrade the product. Reducing scuffing, not overfilling packages, as I had talked about earlier. If you overfill and then stack on top, you can cause damage to most of the product in the box. Using good packing material. I'll talk a little bit about packaging in a minute. And sometimes we need some packaging on the inside of the outer container. And then having good temperature control can help to reduce the effects of physical damage, but hopefully we can avoid the physical damage as well. Okay, yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about packaging. So this is not vegetables, these are fruit, but I put this slide in because it kind of demonstrates a few principles that I think are interesting to consider. So this was actually years ago, this was what they called a ranch pack operation for peaches. And so they were harvesting the fruit into small containers. They brought it into a covered area. And in that covered area, they have all the packing materials that they need. So first of all, the product's out of the sun. You could do this in an air-conditioned area, and that'd be even better. All the packing material is there, and you notice that they've set up some packing stations for the workers. So the box itself is at an angle so they can easily see what they're putting in there. Any internal packing material, it's all in easy reach of the person who's doing the sorting and the packing of that fruit by hand. So anything that is damaged or defective might go to maybe a different purpose, maybe for processing or some other use or different market. And then the product is packed into the container. And in this case, they had a small cold room there that they would move the product to after the box was fully packed. So very simple, but thinking through how you can do this in a way that's going to reduce product damage and make the job easier to do well for the workers. Okay, I want to say a little bit more about packing. I guess I don't have another slide in there. I have seen, I've experienced myself as a consumer some products that I've received through shipments where they really weren't packed very well and had a lot of bruising damage by the time they got to me because the product wasn't immobilized in the packaging. So I think one objective, so you have your outer package, and that needs to be strong enough to withstand any kind of stacking that you're planning on doing. If you're going to be stacking boxes on top of each other, then the boxes have to be strong enough for the box itself to sustain that weight and not the product inside. And then the decision about whether to use internal packing in some ways depends on the product that you're packing. So for some things, they might be really susceptible to water loss, and you might want to consider plastic packaging. I know there's a lot of resistance to using that, and I completely understand that, but unfortunately we haven't come up with a good alternative to help reduce water loss. So you might need some plastic packaging to reduce water loss for leafy greens and things like that. If you have ripe products that are easily bruised, you want to come up with some packaging, whether it's a similar pack to what's shown in this, or they make a similar tray pack out of cardboard that's maybe more environmentally friendly, but something that can immobilize the product inside that package so that when you move that outer box around, the product inside is not sliding back and forth or rubbing on sharp edges. So that's really the objective there, is to figure out how to best pad and protect the product in the most sustainable way. Okay, so I mentioned water loss a couple of times, and for vegetable crops, it's one of the key challenges, especially for the leafy greens. So once we take the product, once we cut it off the roots, it no longer has a source of water. But it still has pores in the surface that will release water to the atmosphere. And inside the product, the relative humidity is about 100% because of the high water content. But in the outside air, depending on what time of year it is, it could be really low. It could be 30%, or maybe it's 60%. But there's a big differential between 100% and then the outside relative humidity. And so that will drive water to move out of your product into the air. And so the other thing that's important is that water loss is cumulative, meaning from the time you take it off the plant, it starts losing water. But initially, you won't notice any problem with that. It looks fine. It's only when it gets to a certain degree of water loss, whether it might be 4% of the initial weight or 5%, then suddenly you see wilting or shriveling of the product. So one of the ways to reduce water loss is good temperature management. And the reason that helps is that at low temperatures, the air cannot hold as much water as it can at high temperatures. So if you have your product, if the product's at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, that outside air is going to be able to hold a lot less water. So you're going to have less water moving out of the product because.
May I ask a question, please? This is Kelly.
Sure, absolutely.
Is it going to be pretty obvious the difference between a dehydrated, let's say the pepper number 5 in the photo here? I'm assuming that effect is purely dehydration. If someone asks me, is that what that is, or is it a disease? Is it going to be obvious and apparent that it's not a disease, that it is only dehydration?
I would say it's mostly apparent. I mean, when it gets really bad, like the number 5 there, the pepper gets pretty squishy. So you could think maybe it was some kind of bacterial infection also that might be, I could see where you could get confused. Although the bacterial infection is generally, once you poke the skin, you're going to get some real wet, slimy tissue. Whereas with this, it's the texture is not going to be wet inside.
Okay, so the test would be to just open it up and then you're going to know.
Yeah, in this case with peppers, yes. Yeah. As you can see behind me, I just did a big pepper study last fall. So I looked at a lot of shriveled peppers. And yeah, you definitely can tell with peppers. So we want to maintain the temperature as low as possible. We want to keep the relative humidity around our product as high as possible, because if it's high, then there's less force, there's less differential between the internal relative humidity and the outside. So you can do that by packaging in a plastic package, because even if that package has some holes in it, the humidity inside will be pretty high, maybe 90% or 85% relative humidity. All right, I'm looking at the time and I think I need to talk a little faster. So I think I've already talked through a lot of this. The other one thing I didn't mention yet is when you get weight loss or water loss like that, it's also weight loss. So meaning that when you go to sell your product, you have less product to sell because some of it just evaporated away. So you don't want that to happen either. You want to be able to get the maximum return for your product. I think I've pretty much, the other thing that will affect water loss is airflow. So I don't know what the weather's like where you are, but here it's really windy. And on a dry, windy day, you can get a lot more water loss than on a still day. Okay, so yeah, this is just giving us the some data on the weight loss for these peppers. So even with 2% weight loss, number one, you don't see any damage. And then as it increases to 4 to 5%, then you can see the shrivel and it continues to get worse from there. So that initial water loss, you won't see anything. And then suddenly it becomes visible. Okay. Water loss also can lead to a loss of fresh appearance. So the product won't look as glossy. It might look shriveled. Okay, so the last thing I want to just go over briefly, because of the season we're in, maybe some of you are handling pumpkins or winter squash. So I just have a few things to talk about there. So there's obviously a wide variety of products that you might be growing. And the maturity for these is can be determined by the appearance of the stem. So this corking on the stem is a sign that the product is mature and ready for harvest. And there can also be a slight difference in the color. So in this kabocha squash, the one on the right is not yet mature. It's really dark green and kind of shiny. The one on the left. The one on the right is more of a dull and lighter green color, and that's one way of showing the maturity. The squash are chilling sensitive, and I'll show you some slide on that in just a minute. And even though they're really sturdy, we still want to handle them with care because you can cause damage that would affect their generally very long storage life.
Beth?
Yes.
Can you comment on the relative importance or any technique around leaving the stem on the squash?
Yes, actually on this next slide. So the stem integrity is really important. So you want to make sure that there's no, so if you leave some of the stem on, then obviously you're going to have that integrity. You won't have any tears in the squash itself that could lead to decay and water loss. But if you do leave the stem on, you want to be careful because if it's really rough, it can damage other products. So if you're going to leave it on and it's rough, then you're going to want to handle the product relative to other product in a careful way so you don't cause damage. So in terms of the internal development, this is actually some data from Marita Cantwell from a number of years ago, looking at the internal color, and she did some evaluations. We want a bright internal color when we harvest the squash with high sugar content and high dry weight. So this middle one, I think, is kind of an optimal maturity. The number 3 maybe is getting to be a little over mature, but maybe still would be acceptable. Whereas number 1 is a bit immature. And the immature squash will actually lose water faster and have a shorter storage life than the ones that are actually harvested at the right stage. So this is what the outside of those squash look like. Okay, and then here's some data on storage temperatures. So this is one of those chilling sensitive crops. And this is after 7 months of storage. So these things, if you handle them, you probably know they can store an incredibly long time. But if you store them at low temperatures, they actually don't do as well. So 50 degrees can lead to quite a lot of decay. And then it's decay because of chilling injury, because the product was actually damaged by those low temperatures. And even at 55 degrees, you get more decay than if you're at 59 or 68 degrees. So that would be the optimal range. So yeah, we want to store them at 55 to 59 with, in this case, a little bit lower relative humidity than some of the other products, the other vegetables would want. Most vegetables you want 90 to 95%. In this case, we want a little bit lower humidity. They can store for many months. And ethylene is that product I mentioned at the beginning that's produced by rotting tissues and ripening fruit and motor engines, mechanical engines, gasoline engines, I should say, and also cigarette smokes. All of those things produce ethylene. So you want to keep all those things away from actually, I would say away from all of your vegetable products. Okay, so just to, I think you just want to try to look at your handling steps from harvest through to the market. Particularly if you're finding that you're not always having the quality you want when you get to market. If you're seeing some issues, then you want to look at all the different steps and see where you can improve on either the harvest timing, the temperature management, how carefully you're handling and packing the product to hopefully make some improvements and then have a better quality at the end of the product's life when you go to sell it. I did want to mention, I've said a couple times during the talk that there's some information available. So Margaret mentioned that I'm currently the director of our Postharvest Technology Center at UC Davis, and Erwin Donis Gonzalez is the associate director. And this is an outreach center that does workshops for the industry and puts together information in a range of different formats. UC Postharvest Technology Center. Hang on. I was going to try to show you this video, see if it's going to work. Now the technology gets me. Let's see. UC Postharvest Technology Center serves the produce industry by providing reliable information that can be used to improve the quality, safety, and marketability. Can you see it? It's so tiny. Vegetables and ornamentals.
Yeah.
Our University of California produce develop and share. I don't know how to make it bigger. And technologies in their areas of. Sorry. I don't really see a way to. Including product physiology. No. Was it too tiny? Sorry, I can't hear you, Margaret.
It was okay. I don't know what it's going to get into, but at the moment it was okay.
It was okay? All right. I'll give it a try. It's just a short video.
Disease management, produce safety, engineering practices, and economics. Their research is funded by federal, state, commodity board, and company grants, and their results are shared on our extensive website, which includes the popular produce fact sheets and an extensive publication library organized by topic. The produce fact sheets are a 2 to 3 page summary of recommendations for handling various types of produce. and includes 60 on fruit or fruit groups and 36 each for vegetables and ornamentals. The produce fact sheets are also available on a free mobile app, giving users handy access to this information wherever they might be, even when out of Wi-Fi range. Over the years, center experts have published a number of books and manuals containing industry-friendly information on handling produce after harvest, which can be purchased through our online bookstore. The Produce Quality Rating Scales, the Commercial Cooling Manual, and the Transportation Series are among the most popular. And each year, the center offers 3 to 4 courses, including our signature Postharvest Technology of Horticultural Crops short course, which includes a tour of produce handling operations throughout California. Also, our fruit ripening and ethylene management workshop, our fresh cut products, maintaining quality and safety workshop, and our produce safety workshop. In 2020, we offered 2 of our courses virtually for the first time. This format was very successful and increased the accessibility of the course due to the flexible online schedule. For all our courses, in addition to our UC experts, we also engage industry and other academic experts with specific experience. These individuals team with ours to share their expertise with short course attendees. Our monthly e-newsletter highlights the latest information and upcoming activities. Visit our website at postharvest.ucdavis.edu to subscribe today and connect with us.
Okay. So finally, I just want to reiterate the Produce Facts app. So that was mentioned during my presentation and in the talk. So if you go to your app store on your phone and just put in UC Davis Post Harvest or Produce Facts, it should pop up, and it's free. And it has, as I said, it has a short summary of the key temperature, relative humidity, and maturity information for a wide range of vegetables, as well as fruit, if you're interested in those. So I talked a little longer than I wanted to, but I'm very open for questions at this point. Thanks for listening.